Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Iain Shaw. When it comes to St. Louis-made beers, there's a special place in Iain Shaw's heart and mine for Civil Life's American Brown Ale. Iain is a staff writer for Sauce magazine, and its latest issue has his essay titled An Ode to Civil Life's American Brown Ale. If ode has you thinking of fanciful phrases for some wild combination of flavors, Iain's praises for the ale actually run rather the opposite. They're squarely focused on its hard-to-nail simplicity. He describes it as a brewer's beer with few imitators, always there, but never boring. And here with us now to talk about Civil Life's American Brown Ale is Sauce Magazine's Iain Shaw. Iain, welcome.
Good afternoon, Elaine.
And also here today is the man behind the ale, the head brewer at Civil Life, Dylan Mosely. Dylan, it's wonderful to have you here.
It's good to see both of you.
Now, it would not be proper to start this without cracking open one of these glorious beers. And this is cold. Full disclosure, I took a sip because it would be rude not to do so. So this American Brown Ale, Iain, is not a wild and crazy concoction or a cutting-edge trend. It's actually a very old kind of beer. What is the history of your relationship with Civil Life's version?
The history for me is, you can maybe tell by my accent that I'm not originally from St. Louis. I come from Scotland, moved here about 5 years ago. And I would say that Civil Life was one of the first breweries here that I visited. Almost immediately, I loved the beer, all of their beers, and the feel of their tap room in South City. And yeah, I mean, as a fan of darker beers, it was just one that I picked up on. But, you know, the more that I drank it, the more I kind of realised there's something very special about this. It's not just a beer that I like because I love stouts or brown ales. Every time I drank it, I would find something new. Mm-hmm. That's where my relationship with it developed.
And then what finally possessed you to write an ode to this beer?
Well, I would say it was a collective possession, I guess. My colleagues and I at Sauce were discussing story ideas for our Guide to Beer issue, which is our March issue. And one thing that we were discussing was we thought we'd like to do something about St. Louis craft beers that have become iconic. So not necessarily the beers that are, the best, but we were asking people, what beers do you think have a special place in the hearts of people in St. Louis? There were a number of other beers that came up, and we're working on a broader story about that. But the Civil Life American Brown was a theme that people mentioned again and again. And so we started to think maybe this beer deserves its own story.
Now, in Iain's essay, Dylan, the ale itself gets described in a lot of ways. A beer for all seasons, a brewer's beer, a teacher's beer, a beer that doesn't scream for your attention. And quote, it's just there, being itself, and waiting for us to come back to it once we've gotten over the latest shiny new beer trend. Let's get some basics here. What are the characteristics of any American brown ale?
Well, I think American brown beer is quite unique in that stylistically it's often traced to homebrew efforts, and as a style it kind of revolved around that. And so you really do see interpretations, and almost all of them do describe hops in kind of a forward way. Mm-hmm. I've seen lighter versions and darker versions, but hops seem to be at least prevalent to the point where the beer is normally described as hoppy. Outside of that, it really can be a lot of things to a lot of people. our version, I think, does incorporate hops to a level that they can really be enjoyed. But I've certainly had versions that kind of borderline more like an India brown or something like that.
And so I am not a beer aficionado. And when people talk about hops, I know that that's the thing to talk about. What is it? What is the kind of profile that comes with something that is too strong in that?
Well, hops can also be a lot of things to different beers. You know, the part of the hop that people often are really using to put into their beer that define it the most are the bittering oils. And so that can really have a profound effect on astringency or bitterness or grip of the beer. And then there are much more ephemeral oils that are in hops that give you that more floral kind of cadence and lightness and more spice box kinds of things. So it's an extremely diverse ingredient.
Broad range.
Yeah.
So how did you go about creating Civil Life's version?
Well, I certainly didn't do it alone. Jake Hafner, the owner of Civil Life, and Mike Bianco, who still brews at Civil Life with me, along with Dustin and Dave and Ryan, who helps out. Mike and Jake and I developed the beer in my basement, and it was cross-pollinated from so many things. But, we had tasted our way through a number of beers and a number of ingredients, and we had settled on quite a few malts that we really enjoyed. And just through a lot of trial and error, we kind of got to a place where the recipe was really dynamic and really diverse, but it just really seemed to have an elegance to it. You have to appreciate that none of us had done this before, and we came from home brewing, and so this was our first foray into the professional world, and we had never made beer on this scale before, and there was a lot of nervousness. And I remember tasting specifically the brown beer out of the tank after our first brew of that beer, and thinking to myself that we were going to make it.
Yeah.
And that was hugely important to me. And, I don't know, I still think about that day. Certainly other people have lent a lot of words of congratulations and people have been very happy to have tried our beer, but it was really kind of that moment. I had so much personal pressure on myself that
well, and
I'm
I'm wondering a little bit about the pressure. We're talking here about Civil Life's American Brown Ale and why this non-flashy brew is an enduring local favorite. We're here with Sauce Magazine's Iain Shaw and Civil Life's head brewer, Dylan Mosely. Now, Iain, as you hear Dylan talk about the development of this beer, your ode/essay, it describes the American Brown Ale as Civil Life's flagship beer. And that comes with some prestige, right? What qualifies this ale as a flagship in your view, and particularly as someone who has sampled beer in many different places and at different times?
Well, Dylan can correct me if I'm wrong here, but when I said flagship, I really mean just basically the beer that if you're going to encounter one beer from that brewery, which is it most likely to be? So it's not necessarily going to be the beer that makes the brewery famous, world famous, by winning an award or something, but it's just if you're going into restaurants and bars around town, it's the beer that you keep seeing. Dylan, tell me if I'm way off the mark.
No, I think that's a great way to think about it.
The one that you find.
The one that you find the
Most
most.
places.
And again, I believe that up to about 2018, at least, the American Brown was one of the only, if not the only, Civil Life beer that you would find off the premises, i.e. not in their tap room.
Ah, okay.
You know, yeah. When I was first visiting St. Louis and then living here, you could go to the tap room and discover this whole world of Civil Life, but outside of the tap room, if you were drinking Civil Life, it was the American Brown. And it's only in the last 5 years that their distribution has really ramped up.
Yeah.
And, you know, things like being stocked in grocery stores.
And this is a beer that I would like to take to my family in Los Angeles. And there's lots of brewing that happens there too.
Sure.
Dylan, do you agree that this flagship moniker for American Brown Ale is one that's fitting? And what does that mean from the brewer side for beer to become that popular? And is there any pressure that's attached to that?
Well, we talk about that a lot, and most specifically, the pressure is that the last couple of years have shown us that there's a lot of supply chain issues, and we're using a fair amount of raw ingredient that comes from the UK. And in the American Brown specifically, there are some overseas malts, and that has caused some issues. We brew more American Brown than any other beer that we do make, and so having those materials on hand is it's very important. And so the last couple of years, having some supply chain issues, not just stateside, but also in the UK, even producing, has been a little bit of a wake-up call to, like, how do we handle things as we keep growing?
Sure.
What do we do in the future? How can we start to think about how do you make a change if one is necessary? And a lot of those questions remain unanswered, but at least knowing that you can't just be safe, and that you do have to make some contingency plans. That's been kind of important and a little scary.
Yeah.
But
It also it occurs to me as being very American. Like, we have ingredients that come from everywhere.
yeah,
And
Yeah.
what we come to expect, it's not just from one place.
well, I mean, it's interesting that you say that, because this is the first time in my life that I can really think. Perhaps when I was younger, that I didn't recognize, but in my adult life, this feels like the first time when you just couldn't run out and just always depend on something to be there or be in stock, or just have it be sitting on a shelf. And I recognize that many, if not all, other countries experience that daily, and so it's it's a little reminder that things can happen here too.
Yeah, it's beer with perspective.
Indeed.
So, in Iain's piece, it's revealed that your colleagues, Dylan, sometimes call you the Malt Whisperer for your ability to handle many different kinds of malts and still end up with a perfectly balanced beer. Tell us about that. What is it about malts that makes them such difficult customers?
Well, I think in terms of just trying to create something that is intended to be enjoyed, one of the criteria is what is enjoyable. And I think a lot of the time, things that are enjoyable are things that you can continue to do. And so that is something that is always on all of our minds in the brew when we're creating a recipe, is like, can you have more than a few sips? Can you have a couple pints? That's
Well,
big deal.
and that leads us to the last question here. I'm a notorious lightweight when it comes to adult beverages. that may or may not have to do with predisposition, a predisposition, that is, to eat as I drink. And in fact, my first pint ever of Civil Life American Brown Ale was a draft glass that I actually finished with a medium rare cheeseburger. What are the optimum physical and social conditions for enjoying Civil Life's American Brown Ale, Iain?
Well, as I said in the piece, it could be the beer that you always have in the fridge for when friends come over, to watch a game or something. It's a beer that you could have with a meal. It's a beer that you could have when you want to have maybe 4 or 5 pints and get an Uber home. Or it could be a beer that you just have 1 or 2, and it's you don't need to worry that you're going to tip yourself over the limit. It can really be suitable for all of these different occasions. I most enjoy it when I'm watching a game of soccer down at Amsterdam Tavern. And yeah, usually it's just 1 or 2.
Yeah. Dylan, how about for you?
Well, I think that beer is, it's just been so important to us culturally, and I think that the best way to enjoy these things is with friends. Even if you already like something, if you share it with somebody else, you like it more.
I would agree. Dylan Mosely is Malt Whisperer and the head brewer at Civil Life. Iain Shaw is the author of An Ode to Civil Life's American Brown Ale, an essay you can drink up in this month's issue of Sauce magazine. Iain and Dylan, thank you both for being here.
Thanks for talking.
This episode was produced by Danny Wissentowski.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr. Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Our podcast proudly supports St. Louis artists by using music from Life Creative Group.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.